Hello, NQ Jazz fans, and welcome to the third of our special MJF editions of the NQ Jazz podcast. This evening featuring my interview with the fantastic saxophonist Iain Ballamy. We discuss his life, his career, our abrasive first encounter, and we listen to a whole plethora of music from across his career. Please sit back and enjoy this interview with Iain Ballamy. Right, hello Iain Ballamy, and welcome to the NQ Jazz podcast. How are you keeping?
I'm keeping just fine, Karen. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Sat in the car with my tenor.
Yeah, it sounds and looks gorgeous where you are. I can hear all the birds in the background. Have you been having a peaceful time of lockdown?
It's been very peaceful, actually. It's been very, very nice. I do slightly like it, if I'm honest.
That's
A
the
lot of bird song, and it's nice.
yeah.
Robin up, making a racket.
We've had a robin, some missel thrush, and some wrens move in the last few weeks, which has been lovely. So yeah, it's nice to let nature back in. All the people
exactly.
have had to bugger off.
Absolutely. It's bloody marvellous. Get it?
So I thought people might like to hear a little bit about how we first met, if you can remember back then.
Yes. Yeah, I think you were in York, wasn't it? I think.
Yeah,
I believe it was in York.
it was indeed in York. So
And well, yeah, I was just about to go on stage, and you came rushing up to me. I'd never met you before, but you came rushing up and said, "Thanks for nicking my gig, mate," or something. And then I had to go on stage. I was thinking, "Oh dear, what have I done?" You know? It was Dave, wasn't it? Dave Smythe.
That's right, yeah. So yeah, I had originally been booked on this gig with Dave, and then he'd got a load of funding together, and then I think Julian
Yeah,
Arguelles had been booked originally. He couldn't do it and gave you a shout, so you ended up doing
yeah.
this gig with Dave, but I went along to watch because I'd been booked anyway. But I was
Yeah.
18 or so at the time, and I spotted you in the bar, came right up to you and went, "You've nicked my gig." But really sort of, like faux aggressively, but obviously just aggressively if you don't know me. So,
Well,
and then right at that moment, Dave came out and said, "We're on stage," and you sort of bemusedly walked.
I thought you were going to take me down my gate and whop my ass.
Yeah, but I had to leave at the interval, so I never got a chance to explain myself. So that was it for a few years then. But
All is forgiven. I had some counselling, and they managed to straighten me out. So I've moved on, man.
right, it's been a long journey, but I'm glad I'm glad we're where we are now. So, speaking of journeys, can you give us the brief history of Iain Ballamy and music and jazz, and how did that all come to be from a young age to becoming a gigging, working, creative musician?
Okay, like a time lapse vid. I'll
Yeah.
try. Okay, father was semi-pro jazz piano player. Always did gigs, lots of functions, jazz gigs and stuff. Whenever mum and dad had parties in the house, there was jazz. So that was exciting when you're a kid. Grown-ups having a party and drinking and all the laughter coming through the floorboards and the music. So I think I grew up within the environment. My father loved things like quite cool stuff, actually. He liked Herbie Hancock, he liked Dudley Moore, he liked Oscar Peterson.
Hmm.
And he had a decent collection of records and reel-to-reel recordings, which I discovered in my teens. First thing I had was piano lessons when I was 6 onwards. And I always say my piano teacher story is a bit like Goldilocks and the 3 piano teachers. It's like the first one was too soft, the second one was too hard, and the third one died. And not because of anything I did, of course, but it was unfortunate coincidence. I had about 2 lessons, and then the fella died. And it was at the time I was just beginning to dwindle at the piano, like doing it more out of guilt than love, and more out of sort of obligation. Even though I'd started playing a bit of Scott Joplin and a few things like that. And then I got shut in a room with a rehearsal my father was doing with a great saxophone player called Brian Maritz. He was only a semi-pro, but he was really, really good. And after about an hour or two, I started looking at this guy thinking, that's quite cool. He's quite cool. Saxophone looked beautiful. He was a bit humorous and a bit kind of relaxed and a bit of a dude, you know. And after about 3 hours, I thought, I want to do that. I literally had that kind of light bulb moment.
Right.
And so I remember saying to my dad, Dad, I want to play the saxophone. And he said, well, they're very expensive. He said, why don't we get Brian over and maybe you can see if you can get a tune out of the saxophone. And it's quite a friendly instrument to get a scale out of, even if you never played a wind instrument before. So I went upstairs and learnt to play a scale. And then he said, well, if you want to get a saxophone, you better find how much they are and where we get one and all that stuff. So he got home from work, you know, on Monday evening, and I said, right, they've got this one here and it costs that much, and this one needs pads, but it's cheaper, but then we need to spend money on pads. And basically, I found a saxophone with my paper round money and a top up from my parents, and I got a fingering chart, and I started learning all wrong on my own, like double lip, embouchure, formed some bad habits quite quickly. And then Kathy Stobart came to the rescue and prescribed a mouthpiece to me from Lewington's and a record from Dobell's in Charing Cross Road, which was ballads by John Coltrane, and a saxophone tutor book called the Otto Lange Saxophone Tutor. And the rest of it, I just practiced until I was getting somewhere and joined rehearsal bands and went to gigs and went to watch my dad, and older musicians helped me out, invited me to sit in, gave me help and advice, and they could see that I was hopelessly interested in it, you know, like there was no stopping me. And one thing led to another. I started to do gigs at the Bull's Head in London, with being paired up with older musicians like Stan Saltzman and Jimmy Hastings, Dick Morrissey, Tony Lee Trio and all that stuff. So I kind of cut my teeth there. Met John Christensen there, and he got me to come and sit in at Ronnie's when I was about 19, I think. And I got my first week at Ronnie's when I was 20. Ronnie's got rung on my birthday, actually.
Hey.
Would you like to do a week at the club? I said, yeah. So I did my first week there in 1984. And then spent about 20 years doing the support at Ronnie's for all kinds of people like Art Blakey, Jazz Messengers, and Dave Holland, and Mel Lewis Orchestra, and Diana Krall, and Arturo Sandoval, and Ira Carey, and Aieto Moreira, and all kinds of people.
Incredible.
I kind of had lucky opportunities that meant I was in the thick of it, as it were, you know.
Yeah, well, yeah, fantastic opportunities, and
Yeah.
through a lot of that time through, I suppose, the 80s and 90s as well. Obviously, you were a member of Loose Tubes, and I saw a beautiful quote that I'll share with everyone. This was from The Guardian, which was, Iain Ballamy emerged from the Loose Tubes stable with an entirely unfashionable saxophone sound, which is a glorious quote of ringing. So first of all, how does it feel to be compared to a load of horses? Is that how it felt in Loose Tubes?
Stable, yeah. Well, Loose Tube was like being in a tribe, really. Loose Tubes. It was one of the first big bands that didn't have a uniform. It didn't have a leader. It was 21 people instead of the normal size, and it was sort of run as a cooperative, as a democracy. It's quite politicized. It started life as a rehearsal band under the stewardship of Graham Collier, who ran Royal Academy, was head of jazz for quite a few years, before Gerard presents it. And that band sort of grew wings. It grew a life of its own, and people inside the band started to write their own charts, and we had guest people bringing music for us to play every week, and we sort of as a bunch of young mavericks, we wanted to write our own music and do our own stuff, not just play charts other people had brought. And so people like Django Bates and Steve Berry and Eddie Parker and Chris Batchelor and a few others started writing music. And as always happens when you're playing your own music, it feels more like what you should be doing. You're not trying to measure up to what's gone before. So yeah, Loose Tubes, that was a great sort of learning experience for me, learning about playing in a section, playing in a band, learning about being in a competitive environment, learning about being in a politicized environment, learning about trying to write and play your own music, and the feeling of being part of something that you feel you belong to rather than something you wish you could clip onto because it happened long ago and far away or something like that.
Yeah.
Lots happened all at the same time. I was playing with Django Bates and Steve Arguelles and Mick Hutton. I was also playing with Bill Bruford and Django with Mick Hutton as well. And we toured America and toured Japan and toured Europe. A lot of stuff started happening very, very quickly, as well as Loose Tubes and playing with people like Billy Jenkins, who I know you want to ask me about Billy. He's a bit of a... He ran the rehearsal studio at Greenwich, where Loose Tubes rehearsed every single Monday. A great tip for getting a band happening is to rehearse every single week, because you make sure you've got something to rehearse every Monday, something new, or things either get better or you start working on new stuff. Billy ran the rehearsal studios at Wood Wharf in Greenwich, and he was very, very active. He put lots of bands and lots of records together. He seemed to just be in hyperdrive, like releasing his music and putting it out himself, and a lot of Loose Tubes people were involved in that as well.
Well, before we have a listen to this a bit of video from Billy Jenkins, I just want to say just before we leave Loose Tubes, how much do you think your latter career would be the same or different if you hadn't been around that group of musicians from a young age in your career? Would you have wanted the same things out of music, do you think, still?
Okay, well, for me, being in Loose Tubes, it was an amazing experience because I realised that when I was younger, when I first started out playing jazz, I didn't go to music school. I didn't know other kids who were into jazz. It was only when I went to Wabondon Jazz Course and started to meet people like the Bancrofts, Tom and Phil Bancroft and Davo Higgins and Mark Lockhart and Nicky Isles, who then played piano actually, and people like that. And so same thing with joining Loose Tubes. It was a coming together of people who are interested in the same, interested in jazz, but interested in being, doing their own music, not interested in just copying. The opposite to the kind of the antithesis of Nigel, you could say. And people in that band, there were some very developed people like Django Bates, who was already confidently writing his own music, and it sounded brilliant. So I think it was an environment where a lot of people were sticking together, playing each other's music and not making any apologies for it. And it kind of cultivated an environment where it was healthily competitive and healthily inspiring at the same time. In terms of what difference it made to me, there were other things going on for me as well as Loose Tubes. Like I had my own band with Django. We started this thing with Bill Bruford. I was playing with Billy Jenkins, and a lot of other stuff happened quite quickly. So unlike some people who were only in Loose Tubes, I felt like it was the main hub of quite a few other things I was involved with.
Yeah, absolutely. And so let's delve into some Billy Jenkins then. So obviously you've explained the link and all of that. Is there anything in particular before we play this clip from the 606 Club of close to you that you'd like to delve into about this in particular, or working with Billy in general?
Well, I think the thing about working with Billy Jenkins is he never considered himself to be a jazzer. He had a band with Ginger Baker at one stage, actually, and he had a band called Trimmer and Jenkins, and I'd say he was more like a kind of hyper version of a sort of James Blood Ulmer blues rooted frenetic kind of naive slapdash kind of almost like comedy player in a way, although he never liked it being compared to comedy. When you ever mention it, he didn't like that. But I think the thing about unpretentious would be an understatement, and I think working with Billy, all the people I know that got to work with him found it very emancipating musically and egotistically, because he wasn't trying to, you know, measure up in jazz terms as being like the most killing, shredding guitar player. He just had, well, I mean, when you see this clip, you know, it's the Carpenters' Bacharach song, "Close to You," and it brings back very fond memories for me. We did all kinds of amazing gigs. Like one example was, I remember we played at the Old Jazz Cafe in Newington Green, and Billy had a three-wheeler car. It was a Reliant Robin, a three-wheeler. So while we were on stage, I had a wireless microphone, you know, clip-on wireless mic. And he said, right, we're going to play a song. It's called Swing Low, Sweet Reliant Robin. And we played it. And then he said, quick, come on. He grabbed his car keys, and I went out with my alto with the mic on. And while the band kept playing on the stage, we were driving around Newington Green. And I carried on playing while he was driving in the three-wheeler. And when we came back in, everybody said the wireless mic was picking up like CB radio and taxis and all kinds of crazy stuff was coming through the speakers, as well as bits of alto and bits of engine noise. So he was very uninhibited. All kinds of funny things happen on gigs, you know. He'd have a gig where it was, for example, Steve Noble versus Billy Jenkins, and it was done like a boxing match with 12 3-minute rounds of free jazz with a 30-second interval. And it was called The Big Fight, and he had like a number of gigs that were billed as The Big Fight.
Brilliant.
It's so funny, yeah. It's
brilliant. Absolutely fantastic. Well, this is Billy Jenkins and Iain Ballamy playing Close to You.
With Martin France and Steve Watts on bass and drums.
Beautiful.
Ballamy said to his mum when he was 6, he said, "Mum, I'm going to grow up and be a jazz musician." She said, "Don't be stupid, you can't do both." One of the pleasures of playing in a wonderful club like the 606 is that you can come out in the early hours of the morning into Lofts Road and you can hear the birds in the trees, the sun's coming up. Everything looks very vivid. It's probably because of the stuff they serve down here. And of course, it's a real pleasure walking around London, being a country it is. It's very nice. Why do birds fall down from the sky?
Dave, what the hell are you doing? What have you shot?
Well, that proves the food is fresh at the 606 Club, that's all I can say. Why do stars suddenly appear? Time you are near, just like me. They long to be. On the day that you were born, the angels got together, decided to create a dream. dream come true. So they sprinkle stardust in your hair and shove things down your legs and trim your eyebrows and put your legs in too and push things up your nose and straighten it out and suck the fat from your thighs and put the estrogen in your lips and pull back your ears. That is why all the dogs in town sniff you up and down, just like me. They long to be with Iain Ballamy. You were born in May, got together, decided to create a dream come true. So they sprinkle stardust in hair, pushing stimulation to the neck, put out and push it in hair, and your eyes are blue, like your eyes are blue. Is why all the boys in town are you all around, just like me. They long to be close to you, close to you. Where's our food? Why do you want his autograph for anyway?
Great. So that was Billy Jenkins and Close to You. I also wanted to ask. So this BBC publication that came out that listed you between Count Basie and Chet Baker as 100 greatest jazz musicians of all time. What's your take on on that placement? and which was behind and which was in front?
I guess Baker was in front and Basie was behind, wasn't it?
Right, okay.
Alphabetically. Well, my take on it was
it's an alphabetical thing. I thought it was that's fine. I thought this was a top 100 jazz musicians, ranked in order, and you'd snuck in past Basie, but we're catching up on Baker.
No, I think the way it was Jeffrey Smith had done it. I think the way he'd done it was 100 greats, but he'd done them in alphabetical order. So
grand, yeah.
I don't think it was like the kind of thing where you rank 175th equal best tenor player in the world or something.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, that was what I was thinking.
Like
This seemed like a bizarre happening. Yeah.
no, it's very silly. I mean, you know, the idea of ranking 100 anything. I guess it was his pick of 100 people that he felt had done something notable, and it was a lovely thing to be included, actually.
Absolutely.
I think Jeffrey Smith wrote it. He was particularly tickled by the stuff I'd done with Stian Carstensen, who's an amazing accordionist from Norway. He comes from two sides of, you know, two generations, both sides of the family, accordionists.
Right.
And he took it up, you know, when he was very young. There's little clips of him on Norwegian telly in the, I don't know, late 70s, I guess, is it? I'm not exactly sure. When he was 10 anyway, or 9, they had him, and the accordion looked a lot bigger than him, you know. And we started playing a while ago, maybe about 20 years ago, and discovered that not only did we know and love a lot of the same tunes, just coincidentally, because he likes odd old English tunes like Teddy Bear's Picnic or you know, Mad Dogs and Englishmen or Noel Coward stuff or into all kinds of stuff. But not only did we know a lot of tunes and like a lot of repertoire in common, but we found that when you played with accordion and saxophone, there's a sort of sonority and a mixing of the sound, you know, the reeds, and the sound blends so well that if you get the balance right, it's hard to tell who's playing what, you know, when you get intertwined. And he's a complete virtuoso. So really quite a force to be reckoned with and to keep up with. We've done lots of lovely concerts all over the place, and a few records as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was something that I'd wanted to ask you about anyway, Little Radio. But how did you first meet Stian?
Well, actually, we played at the Royal Northern College of Music, and we were both working with Django Bates. It was an extended, sort of a enlarged version of Human Chain with a singer and with Stian added and somebody else. I can't remember who now. And all the electronic gear broke down, and we were stuck on stage in a sound check, surplus to requirements, and we just went off into the back room, and then to pass the time started playing, and we realised that we had this sort of connection that turned into, you know, 20 years and counting.
Fantastic.
We play the nice thing about it is we just play music that we love. So it might be jazz, or it might be Vaughan Williams, it might be Whitney Houston, or it might be Fats Waller, it might be a tango, or it might be something from Kurt Weill, you know.
Yeah.
And I think doing Teddy Bear's Picnic was either the most uncool or the coolest thing in the world, but it wasn't done for any of those reasons. It was done literally because we both like Teddy Bear's Picnic. So
yeah, well, I mean, the Teddy Bear's Picnic one in particular is one that I love because I think I mentioned this to you in the past, but I performed it at the World Saxophone Congress a few years ago. Your arrangement of it with Stian, it was a saxophone quartet I was part of at the time. The alto player in the quartet, a gent called Will Upton, who I think works for the Luxembourg City Council these days. I can't quite remember what he's up to.
a good idea.
Yeah, yeah. But a fantastic musician and brilliant sax player. And he absolutely loved that album. He was the guy who got me into that album in the first place. But he said, I really think we were doing the Schmidt Quartet, which is a really sort of virtuosic roast up of, you know, classical saxophone, serious, you know, monocle on repertoire. Yeah. And we thought we should balance that out with something a bit more light-hearted. So we transcribed and tried to arrange Stian's, you know, accordion voicings for 4-part saxophone quartet. Yeah. Not the easiest task in the world, but the video's still up on YouTube, so you can go and have a check out of that.
That sounds very fun. Yeah, very good.
A few American quartets wanted to buy the arrangement, but we felt we shouldn't profit off other people's music, so we never did.
That was the before everyone was stealing everything hither and thither, I guess.
Well, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Well, so
Yeah.
we've also picked out a clip of the duo with Stian playing Stardust.
Okay.
Is there anything you'd like to
Um,
say before we have a look?
well, I can tell you just a couple of things about Stian.
Please, yeah.
He's like a Pied Piper, really. He's one of these people who I describe as a musician who's much bigger than just being an instrumentalist or an accordionist. He plays as well as a button accordion. He plays a Bulgarian flute called a kaval. He also, which he was teaching Michael Brecker how to play actually by email in the last days of Brecker's, last months of Brecker's life. He was teaching him via email how to play the kaval because Michael Brecker guested with Stian's band called Farmers Market and got very interested in the Balkan kind of ornamentation that the saxophone player in that band was using.
Have you ever seen the video of Brecker doing Delta City Blues, where he just cuts out and starts playing some Bulgarian folk tune for 2 or 3 minutes, and then just carries on with
I can imagine this would be related to having come into contact with Stian, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've not seen that. But in addition, he also plays guitar, violin, banjo, because he saw Deliverance and thought, oh, I fancy learning banjo. So he plays that, and as well as accordion and pedal steel guitar. And he's the only musician I know who's been pulled over and booked by a traffic cop for practicing violin whilst driving, which is quite a claim to fame. Bear in mind that in Norway it's a left-hand drive car, so the police car behind him would have seen the stick kind of poking in and out of the window and then pulled him over thinking, what's going on here? And then he saw the violin and the bow on the back seat, and apparently the guy was just sort of lost for words. He was just sort of pointing at, you know, like he knew he had to bust him, but he wasn't sure quite what for. So, you know, like which penalty code it was, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so he's a wonderful musician.
Absolutely. Well, so this is your version of Stardust. Enjoy. Great. So that was the fantastic Stian Carstensen there with yourself. Am I pronouncing that correctly? Carstensen.
Yeah.
Carstensen. Yeah. Fantastic. So obviously the reason we are here chatting today is because if all had been going according to plan, you would have been coming up to play at the Manchester Jazz Festival in the next week. So obviously we're pretty heartbroken after a huge amount of work putting together a program we were very proud of to not actually be able to sit back and enjoy all of the music that comes from that, but we will hopefully have you up in Manchester sometime very soon, whenever that's all possible to happen again. The band that you would have been coming up with to Manchester is your quartet, Iain Ballamy Quartet, with Hugh Warren, Yuri Golubev, and that's another pronunciation you might need to pull me up on, and Mark Whitlam. So you've got a slightly flexible quartet lineup. I know you play with Jason Rebello a lot as well, and
yeah.
But I know yourself and Hugh play together obviously a tremendous amount in various projects with Quercus and in duo settings and all sorts. So and Hugh came and played for us at the Whiskey Jar within the last year or so, and was an absolutely fantastic night. So I wondered if you could tell us first of all a little bit about your relationship with Hugh and how that came to be, and maybe a bit about Quercus and how that came to be as well, please.
Okay. Well, for all the many years I was working with Django Bates, which was about 20 something years, I was so kind of closely working with him. I knew Hugh Warren, but I didn't really get to play with him. It's like the Venn diagram of who plays with who doesn't always cross over as much. Well, I mean, you can't play with everybody all the time. And even though I'd known Hugh for a very long time, we'd never really connected until I got asked to come and play on a June Tabor record. And apparently she'd heard a song I'd done on my first record and really loved it. It was a song called All I Ask of You. And she loved that. And on Woman's Hour, I think she mentioned how much she liked this thing. And I was rather touched by that, because she's such a extraordinary legend and amazing singer with such great gravitas to everything she does. And Hugh had been working with her for years and years and years. And so when I came to play on her record with Hugh, there was a couple of gigs that came out of that as a quintet, actually, with Martin France and Tim Harries, as well as me and Hugh Warren and June Tabor. And then after that, we just started playing as a threesome with Hugh, myself and June. And that's when Quercus was born, I suppose about 15 years ago. So I was the new boy in the band, because they'd been playing for like, I don't know, 15 years already, at least, maybe more, maybe 20. And that was the chance then for us to discover that we fit very well musically together. He's extremely flexible, extremely versatile, wonderful accompanist, very jazzy and very folky and very quirky and very original, and quite abundant in technical, but with a wonderful touch as well. So Hugh Warren's an extraordinary piano player. I hope you all get to play with him one day. He's just he's a very good accompanist. I mean, for me, like, the acid test of a really great piano player is not just how they play when they're in a trio, but it's what's going on in the background and the touch and the suggestion of what they play.
Absolutely. And then with Mark Whitlam's a drummer whose name I don't necessarily see around on the UK circuit as much as some others. And
No.
how did yourself and Mark come to be working together?
Well, yeah, there's a lovely local gig in Bristol called the Bristol Fringe, and it's a back room of the pub, and it's so small that the audience and the band are all crammed in together. And I got asked to come and play there a few times with the house trio. Quite often it was Mark Whitlam on drums, and Percy Purseglove on bass. And I really hit it off with those two guys. And also Jason Rebello doesn't live too far down the road from me either. And I really liked the idea of, apart from Percy being in Birmingham, I really liked the idea of, because I live in Frome in Somerset, the idea of having a band which wasn't in London. That didn't mean having to go and have rehearsals in London and hiring a studio. I like the idea of something being not the same people as in everyone else's band. All the best drummers get shared between about 20 different bands. You can never get hold of them. It's great for the popular drummer, but rubbish for everyone else. And I got really fed up with going to play at a gig somewhere, and you'd look who'd been there the week before, and it would be the same drummer in everybody else's band. It's like the guy's there once a month for the whole year.
Yeah.
And Mark's a terrific player, very versatile, very diverse, quite a good producer and a good range of styles he plays. He's a decathlon drummer, I'd call him. So for me, perfect to play with. Percy Purseglove, absolutely brilliant bass player and plays flugelhorn incredibly well as well. He's just been poached for the NDR big band. He's got the...
Yeah, I saw that. Amazing.
And then Jason Rebello, I mean, what can you say about that guy? He's a fabulous piano player. So when Jason can't do it, Hugh does it. And when Percy can't do it. Yuri does it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so we obviously would have been looking forward to that an awful lot, but we were getting Hugh and Yuri, so and how does the Yuri link come about?
Well, Yuri lives in Taunton when he's not in Milan and Moscow, and he teaches at the Royal Welsh College as well. And I asked him to do a couple of depths, and the nice thing about the band is that it's different, but it's equally well balanced. When it's your band, it's your band, if that makes sense. So you can have who you want, but you don't want to be looking to fill an awkward space with the wrong person. But the only person I haven't had a depth for ever is Mark. But other than that, you know, Yuri or Percy are great to play with Jason, and they're great to play with. It all works well, you know.
With your own quartet, is there a other than just, you know, the joy of playing whatever you want to play, is there a particular ethos musically in mind for that, distinct from other projects that you do, or do you see very much every project that you do as being within the same space, just with different people and different instrumentation and therefore different possibilities?
I think there's a thread running through everything because of the way you play and what your voice is on the instrument. But I think with a band, you know, the great bands have to find a fit. I think it takes a while.
Mm-hmm.
You can't go on sort of Tinder and sort of knock up a great quartet just because everyone's really good. I think it needs to have an ecology or a balance, or it takes a while to find to bake that slowly. It's a slow, like the slow foods process, isn't it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't flash fry a band. You need to sort of
Slow cook it.
Yeah. It's frustrating because you might enjoy playing with people. If you're thrown together, it might be great, but for it to actually become infused in a really good way, I think it takes a natural amount of time. And so I haven't got like I think I'm still finding my thing with this band. I mean, when I keep bands together, they tend to stay together for a very long time. I've never been one of those, oh, what's your next project, Ian, kind of people. Some people just have a quick project for a year or two and then they move on to something else. But I've always liked the idea of a band that you take the journey with.
Yeah, great.
Rightly or wrongly, I value that, you know.
Yeah. And so we pulled out a clip of the lineup that would have been playing at the Manchester Jazz Festival, and this is from Wells Cathedral School. I presume were you doing a workshop there or something?
We didn't. There was no workshop. We just did a little a concert in the beautiful Cedars Hall, which they built in the last couple of years.
Beautiful. I suppose is that a fairly local one for you then, actually, Wells?
It's about 17 miles away.
Great, lovely, yeah. That's a nice hall to have for your local gig.
Yeah, no, it's a wonderful place, you know. Plus, they filmed Hot Fuzz there, so what more could you want?
Oh, great! Fantastic. So this is your take on April in Paris. Is there anything you want to say maybe about the role of standards as you see in your quartet or in jazz in general?
Well, it's funny. It's one of those tunes I'd always wanted to play it, but never got round to it. I think it's hearing "Bird with Strings," you know, that beautiful Charlie Parker album. Yeah. And I remember once watching a film. I can't remember the film, but at the very end, as the credit came up, they used the Charlie Parker "Bird with Strings" version of "April in Paris," and I just thought I've always wanted to do this song, but not been quite sure how to do it, you know. And then I came up with some sort of Blade Runner-ish harmony for it and found a setting for it. And a bit like a dog with a bone, you know, if you give a dog a bone, it sniffs it and licks it and then ignores it and then chews it a bit and then takes it up the garden and then growls a bit and then buries it and then digs it up again. And I think tunes are the same as a bone. You need to bond with a tune. My way of bonding with a tune isn't just to get it out of the real book and play it. I kind of feel like I need to make personal connection of some kind with it, either with the harmony or the melody or the interpretation of it, or something just to make a feeling of a connection to the tune. So also that's a good way, I think, to get a band connected. Like I was saying before, a good starting point is material that you know but reimagined, rather than going straight in with a whole set of kind of hardcore original material. Mm-hmm. I think a nice mixture of, you know, folk music standards and originals and classical music is a nice program. Yeah. And at the end of the day, it's like a veggie kebab, isn't it? It's got mushroom, a bit of courgette, some red pepper. What's the other thing?
Might get a bit of halloumi in there.
Bit of halloumi, yeah. Hello, is it me you're looking for? Yeah. So I think that's what makes a good gig, you know. I don't think it's necessarily what makes a good record. I think a good gig is an assortment of different things, and I think a good record is a box of chocolate Brazils, but that's another subject of the story.
Excellent. So this is the Iain Ballamy Quartet playing April in Paris. Enjoy. Great. So that was April in Paris, as you've probably not quite heard it before. And so you've obviously had a very varied career musically in terms of your own music and in terms of projects that you've worked on with other people. You know, folk music, classical music, standards, electronic music. Where do you see yourself sitting within the world of music?
Um, I I think when I started out, I wanted to be a jazz saxophone player, and then after I'd been functioning or operating, or after I become a jazz saxophone player, I realised that I wanted to be a musician. And I know that sounds really silly because I already was one, but I was thinking more outside of my instrument, more outside of jazz in inverted commas. And I became very much more interested in the thread or the commonality that joins everything together that you could be a part of as a musician, rather than the posts and pegs that delineate this genre and that. Anything that involved being authentic or legitimate or real, if it's only done in a certain way or something like that, started to become very unappealing. I was more interested in what music and what collaborations and what connections I could make with other musics and other musicians, rather than either just sticking to jazz because saxophone's a jazz instrument, or wishfully looking at other musics where it was a party that I wasn't invited to on my instrument, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't really see any of these things as, I don't see them as different compartments. I see them as all part of a bigger picture musically. The musicians that I admire most of all are interested in music in the bigger and greater and more macro sense. So people like Hermeto Pascal and Arve Henriksen, and people who are not afraid to make music outside of their comfort zone, or to collaborate, or to work with musicians from other parts of the world. That's interesting to me.
Yeah. One of the things that you've done that's a bit different for a jazz musician is you've performed a couple of concertos and had a concerto written for you. And how did it come about that you were the person, you were the man for the job to go and play with BBC Symphony Orchestra and play the Rodney Bennett concerto?
Right. Well, that's interesting because a few years ago, there's a wonderful violinist called Charlie Mutter. Do you know him? He plays with the Scottish Chamber Orchestra, and he's a proper top classical violinist, absolutely great. And he was curator of the Glen Borrowdale Festival in the Highlands in Scotland. And he got in touch. I'd met him through the Smith Quartet when I was working with Django a few years ago, Django Bates. Charles got in touch and he said, I'm commissioning a couple of pieces for the Glen Borrowdale Festival, which I program, and would you be interested in writing a double brass quintet? And obviously I've never written a double brass quintet before in my life. So I said, yeah, and then thought, shit, what do I do now? But I wrote a double brass quintet, and also Gary Carpenter, who's a wonderful composer. He's based up in the north of England, teaches at the Royal Northern, and he lives on the Wirral. He wrote a double brass quintet too. So we were both commissioned to write this piece for the festival. Then we went up to see the respective pieces we'd performed, that we'd written, to see the pieces performed. And I met Gary, we got on very well. And over the couple of days and quite a few beers, one night I said to him, look, I've got a problem. And the problem is everybody loves the saxophone. Everybody loves it. And the tenor saxophone is the godlike king of all saxophones, in my opinion. I said, the problem is everyone loves it, but where's the concertos for tenor saxophone? Where? There aren't any. I said, the tenor saxophone in classical music is relegated to a kind of androgynous member of a saxophone quartet. If you're lucky, maybe a concerto for soprano or alto. and I'm not happy about it. You know, where is the music for the tenor saxophone? What's going on? And at the end of my rant and our pints and stuff, he said, "Well, maybe I should write one for you then." And I thought, wow, yeah, that'd be amazing, and never gave it another thought, because that's a huge undertaking, as you know, to thing like that commissioned. And about 2 years later, he rang me up one day and he said, "It's going to happen." He said, "Got the funding, got the thing. It's going to happen. It's going to be
Brilliant.
BBC Phil, 85-piece orchestra, 25 minutes long, 5 movements." And that's not something I'd ever done before. I'd worked with the orchestra a little bit before, but not as a concerto soloist, or in fact only once. But we started working together, and he started sending the music through, and it was really a great experience. It actually got recorded and broadcast live from Bridgewater Hall with the BBC Phil, and then we did it in Strasbourg at the World Sax Congress with a Philharmonic Orchestra there, and then finally it was recorded in 2018 with the Liverpool Phil.
I was there at the premiere, so I'll have been heard from the audience whooping and cheering on the broadcast.
Yeah, well, I think that was my first blooding, you know, if you like. You need to have a few more goes at these things to feel that you've earned the confidence and experience. But anyway, that led to doing the Richard Rodney Bennett Concerto for Stan Getz, which Getz never played, sadly, because he died just after it was written. But you know, that was
But funnily, sort of more often than not, it's classical tenor players that get programmed to perform it, which seems like you know, maybe not quite in the spirit that it was written, but
it would have been wonderful to have heard Getz play it. You know,
absolutely, yeah.
That really would have been an amazing thing to. I can't quite imagine it in a funny kind of way, and yet I kind of can. It's a great piece. It's hard.
Yeah.
I agreed to do it, and then I got the music, and then I went,
Yeah, but Rodney Bennett's written an awful lot for saxophone, which is great. There's a good trove to delve into, which is wonderful. And then, you know, another thing that maybe is slightly more unusual for a jazz saxophonist, you've written the scores for a couple of films. How did that come about, and how was the experience?
Well, I know an amazing graphic artist and film director called Dave McKean. He's an extremely talented musician and photographer, filmmaker, script writer. He's a very, very talented guy, and he actually designed all my album covers. Yeah, you know, we started a record label together in the, you know, in the early noughties, 2000 or something, and released some of the food CDs and other stuff. And he had a connection with Neil Gaiman, who wrote the script to a film called Mirror Mask, which then was taken up by the Jim Henson Company. Yeah. And I was asked to write the score, and that was a very big learning curve. The film was made mostly with blue screen, and it wasn't locked down until very, very, very late in the day. They kept changing stuff and rendering stuff, and they were using software that was open-ended and not completed to do the animation. And this is about 2005. There was a lot of music in relation to the length of the film as well.
Okay. Yeah.
A lot of minutes of music per, you know, in relation to the duration.
Yeah.
And a scary contract that says basically we can make you do this again and again and again until you're bankrupt or dead, you know.
And after you got past the shock of that, how did you go about it? What was the instrumentation? Did you have a complete carte blanche for the whole thing?
Well, the beginning of the film started with it's sort of set in a circus family, and it started in a circus big top with a circus band. So the music that I wrote for the circus band was Stian on accordion, Chris Batchelor on trumpet, myself on saxophone, Stuart Hall, Martin Prance on drums, bass player. I can't exactly remember right now.
Amazing. Yeah.
And then we literally filmed that stuff live in characters, sort of acting in the film and playing live in the big top. And then the rest of the music was a mixture of stuff created on computer and a mixture of sessions with cellists and guitarists and string players and some stuff just done on the computer and some stuff a mixture of the two, and voices. And the highlight of that film for me is actually another version of Close to You, which I don't know if you've ever heard,
Right.
but with Josephine Kronholm singing, who's a Danish singer. And we did a sort of multi-track version, like a surreal version, like with all clocks ticking and gears grinding, of Close to You. And you can see that on YouTube if you Google YouTube Mirror Mask Close to You.
Great. Yeah.
And that really came out as an amazing scene. That.
Yeah, well, I'm going to definitely go and watch the whole film. To be honest, I want to see the big top scene as well.
I think it would probably appeal to you more if you were a 14-year-old girl. But
Oh, really?
it's quite a fascinating film, actually. It's
Well, Neil Gaiman's
the main
brilliant.
character is a young girl who's. It's a story about a young girl. So.
Mhm. Yeah, but I've been a big Neil Gaiman fan since teenage years as well. So yeah, that's the reason that you got to work with Neil, or work on a musical endeavor with Neil as well.
Right.
And so, having worked with orchestra as a performer, has it ever tickled you to want to have an opportunity to write for a full symphony orchestra?
I wouldn't say I don't want to do it, but I haven't got like a kind of bucket list of things I must do one of before it's all over. I haven't got. I'm not really. I'd say never, but it's not like I haven't got like a burning.
Sure.
I think it's a big thing, really, isn't it, to do a big thing like that? I don't think you can be likely to get it right first time, maybe.
Well, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it would be a nice thing to do. I suppose I might like to write something and then have somebody who knows what they're doing arrange it. I'm quite happy. I'm a willing collaborator. You see, I don't need to own every step of every single thing.
I mean, lots of great composers were dreadful at the final part of actually turning it into a good piece for orchestra. Mussorgsky, have you ever listened to Night on Bear Mountain?
No.
So it's big famous orchestral piece. Sounds absolutely amazing. But the original orchestration by Mussorgsky is absolutely dreadful, and it sounds nothing like the famous version. He just wrote a few good tunes, and then one of his students turned it into a great piece of orchestral music.
Yeah, I think I can write a good tune, but I think the other thing is probably somebody else's department.
Sure. And so, you've got a new album out at the moment with Ian Shaw and Jamie Safarudin called What's New? And so we wanted to play a track of this to sort of bring things maybe towards the close a little more, something fresh off the press. Could you tell us a little bit about this new trio and what the deal is with all of that? Okay,
well, in the 90s, I played on at least 3 of Ian Shaw's albums, actually.
Right.
I played with him at Ronnie Scott's many times, and we actually made a record which was a bucket list thing for me. It was a record with Cedar Walton and David Williams on.
Amazing.
And we recorded that in New York, and apparently the piano was the old piano from Capitol Studios, which was used
Wow.
on Color Blue. So that was that was an amazing thing. But after a gap of quite a lot of years, Ian Shaw got in touch and he said, I'm doing a week at the Pizza Express, a week of gigs with different guests every night. Would you like to come and do one with me and Jamie on piano? And that was about a couple of 2 or 3 years ago, maybe. And I did it in a January, and then the following January we did it again, and this January too. And so it just seemed like a really nice fit to do something just with the three of us. And we decided to record it down the road. There's a beautiful concert hall with a lovely piano. It's a small privately owned small venue, and we hired that and recorded over a couple of days a bunch of tunes, a lot of which were inspired by music that my father had taught me or showed me or made me aware of. He actually died in October last year, so this album, in a way, it was kind of partly a kind of a tribute, dedication, devotion, thank you thing. There's some lovely songs on there, things like I'll Only Miss Him When I Think of Him. And now, what with the old COVID problem, not to be silenced, having all the gigs taken away that we had in the book, we decided to make a video remotely with everybody sending in clips, and Jamie put the thing together very beautifully on his computer at home, and we chose the track by Michel Legrand called Once Upon a Summertime. I first heard that tune actually on a Blossom Dearie album that was recorded live at Ronnie's, and we made a little video to go with it, and I think that's what you might be about to play.
Fantastic. Well, sit back and enjoy.
Once upon a summertime, if you recall, we stopped beside a little flower stall. A bunch of bright forget-me-nots was all I'd ever let you buy me. Once upon a summertime, just like today, we laughed the happy afternoon away and stole a kiss at every street cafe. You were sweeter than the blossoms on the tree. I was as proud as any man could be, as if the man had offered me the key to Paris. Now another winter time has come and gone. The pigeons feeding in the square have flown, but I remember when the vespers chimed. You loved me once upon a summertime. than the blossoms on the tree. I was as proud as any man could be, as if the mayor had offered me the key to Paris. Now another winter time has come and gone. The pigeons feeding in the square have flown, but I remember when the vespers chimed. You loved me once upon a
So that was Once Upon a Summertime, gorgeous. So we'll link below to the new album so that people can go and check all of that out. I wanted to ask you now, as we come to rounding up the podcast, what are your, at the moment obviously we're all in a bit of a funny situation. How are you taking stock of the future and things coming slowly back to normal, and what are your musical plans over the next while?
Well, I'm not sure what the coming back to normal thing's going to be. I mean, there's a question mark, and I think we're quite adaptable creatures, human beings and musicians as well. How have I spent the lockdown? Well, I've taken the opportunity to get myself into position to record using Logic, to record the piano, to send tracks to people that I've been asked to be part of certain things, like Denny Eilert did a big band Jimi Hendrix thing, and I contributed a couple of tracks to that and videoed and sent that in. So I've learnt to use Logic and the gear better. I'm using the new Sibelius properly and better now, and I've also taken to doing my Royal Academy and Guildhall and Royal Welsh College teaching online, so I've learnt to give Zoom lessons and consolidate some of the things I'm trying to teach people, put them into a more manageable package and more coherent way of doing stuff like that. So there's definitely been some great advantages to that. I think the hardest thing is perhaps having every day being the same sort of day, because like a typical week for me would not be any 2 days the same, or certainly no 2 weeks the same. So I think it's the test of everybody's self-motivation and making yourself get things done or achieve stuff where you don't actually have a deadline or commitment to do anything. I think some people I've talked to have found it quite hard to literally to motivate themselves for nothing in particular. So
I think it was possibly Andre Kanya I was chatting to the other day, doing some recording, or one of our other MJF artists, who said it feels like they're living Groundhog Day at the moment,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
so,
that's a good word for it. I mean, luckily it's been a nice Groundhog Day, because fortunately I live in a nice environment, and the weather's been beautiful, and like your good self, we've been planting vegetables, and we've got chickens and
great.
so nothing to complain about apart from the big question mark about the future, and when we get to do what we do again, in other words, to play live music in an occasion and an environment and in a situation with real people, playing real music to real people in a real situation. And I'm missing that a lot already. I'm finding that there's isolation and there's isolation. I think for musicians, isolation is not playing and not playing with people, for people. I think that's the hardest thing at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I've decided to get on and write a setting for the Lord's Prayer, which I've been meaning to do for choir and organ, and I'm well through that. You know, it's getting 3/4 of the way finished, and so I think as long as we've got something to show for this time, you know, whatever that might be, it might be a new way of thinking, new way of working, new way of evaluating and calibrating what's important to us. It's also good to get regular sleep, regular rest, you know, kind of go to bed at the same time every night now and get up kind of at the same time. Whereas normally it could be a vast range of bedtimes and up times.
Yeah. I do think there'll be a lot of, you know, self-evaluation of everyone's lives in the wake of all of this, just in terms of the things people put themselves through in the course of just having to exist and live and work, that sometimes are needless and sometimes feel important, but maybe now with a bit of reflection and hindsight aren't always. Yeah, I'm certainly looking forward to maybe having a better balance of life with a bit of time to have stepped away and maybe thought about the whole thing without being in the thick of it. Mm-hmm.
Well, so somebody said every problem comes with a gift, bearing a gift, or something like that, you know. So,
well, with that in mind, then, have you got any advice or top tips to the audience for things they could be checking out, spending their time doing, thinking about during isolation and lockdown and all of this?
I suppose the only thing you can really do is like work out what's important to you and not put things off. You know, when this lockdown thing started, I after the initial sort of shock of it, and it was a bit of a shock actually, because everything got cleared away and nobody knew what was going on and stuff. But very early on in it, I thought, well, it's a breather for the earth. It's the time to take stock and recalibrate. But also, I was thinking, I'm not going to come out of the other end of this with nothing to show for it. So I think if you can use the time to do something that you've been putting off, whatever that is, and to try and achieve something, it's a good feeling, you know. Get something started and continued and finished, and you've got something to show for it at the end of it. That it does feel good. It's a nice reward. Absolutely.
Well, I suppose with that, then we look forward to hearing the choral setting when it's done. Are there any plans afoot yet? I suppose it's probably far too premature, but to record or to have that performed live at some point.
Well, I think the first thing would be to get it finished and then see if I can get it sang and get it played and then see what it sounds like. I've even thought of like doing a little mock up, you know, like get my wife and one of my sons to sing the other parts and see if I can, I don't know, just put it together. But the good thing is I'm not scared of Logic anymore. I mean, I know that now if somebody said, can you send me a track, I know how to do that now. Whereas 2 months ago, I'd never given a Zoom lesson and I didn't really have any home recording capability, just because it seemed like a big learning curve, you know, something that was easier just to get somebody else to do. But that's changed now, so I feel like I've shifted on a little bit.
Fantastic. Then you're a new man, Iain.
I'm a new man.
Thank you so much for taking the time out to join us and have a chat about all sorts. And obviously we're heartbroken to not be having you up at the Whiskey Jar. But hopefully as soon as things are possible, we'll have you up and we'll enjoy that when it happens. So.
Yeah, like a shot, Kyron. Thank you. Yeah.
It's a pleasure. Listen, keep well, keep safe, and we'll see you again soon in Manchester. All the best, Iain.
Okay, all the best, man.
Bye-bye. Hello again, Yankee Jazz fans. Thank you so much for taking the time out to tune into the podcast this evening with Iain Ballamy. A massive thanks, of course, to Iain for giving his time to talk to us. very grateful as always, and it's such a pleasure. Please head over to ballamy.com if you would like to check out all of his projects, all of his releases, and also head over to patreon.com/NQJazz if you would like to check out the rest of our digital programme, including a plethora of concerts, some silent movies with improvised soundtracks, and the rest of our podcast series as well. Thank you so much. We will see you tomorrow evening for our podcast with the fantastic Lauren Kinsler. See you then.